So we've got Ed Choi from Sierra Leone, Enable Sierra Leone. If you look in the back, his poster is in the back. So you can see his poster and go look at that a little bit later. But for now, I think Ed is all set. He is screen sharing with us to tell us about what his chapter is working on. So Ed, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. I'm calling in from London, and today I'm going to talk about what we've done in the past 2 years. Thank you for being here. So we call Enable Sierra Leone because we work in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone is a West African country on the Atlantic coast of Africa. It's a very small country, the size of Ireland. And it has a lot of prosthesis needs because of the long civil war back in the 90s. As you can see, some people have their hands chopped off, and some people have 1.5 of their hands chopped off. Like they've been attempted but haven't been successful. So people have been living with disabilities for a long, long time. So a lot of the NGOs that were there have now left. So a lot of the disabled people feel a little abandoned. So I set up the Enable Sierra Leone as a UK-based social enterprise, and we're funded by online crowdfunding. Our organization is actually quite holistic. We don't only just make prostheses, but because as we learn more about the country and the amputees, we know that there are lots of different types of needs. So we do mainly 6 different types of activities to enable the amputees to live. We make prostheses, and for the double amputees to eat, we make this Velcro wristband that you can stick a spoon on so that they can eat. We also support a single leg football team so that they can play. And we supported amputees to run a marathon in crutches. So because they inspire me and I want them to inspire more people. A lot of these disabled people are living in villages very far away from town with no running water or electricity. So we decided to install solar panels for them as well. And last but not least, we want to maintain a local presence. So earlier this year, I set up a local workshop as an NGO in northern Sierra Leone, and we'll talk about that later. So we do quite a few things. Our story began because of Ebola. I'm a biomedical scientist, so I was sent to Sierra Leone to diagnose suspected patient to see who has Ebola and who hasn't in the middle of the epidemic. And once the outbreak was over, I stayed behind to build new laboratories to strengthen the hospital system. And as I got to know more about the society and the country, I realized that it's a really beautiful, really friendly place, and I just fell in love. But I also was intrigued by something that I saw. I found these amputee camps dotted around the countries, and then I started asking questions like, what are these amputee camps? How come they have so many amputees that you can actually put them together in a village? And that's when I got introduced to Mr. Ibrahim Conte. He's a veteran prosthetist who's been working with amputees for longer than 20 years since the Civil War. So he took me into the villages and introduced me to the amputees. Naturally, I wanted to find out what happened to them. But it was a long process because a lot of foreigners have approached them and promised that they'll bring changes and they'll bring help. But no one ever returned after fundraising. So they got really wary of outsiders. But I was very persistent. I was very pesky. So in the end, they told me their stories. And I started to understand them and gained the trust. So as you can see, some of the prostheses that they have are longer than 10, 20 years old, and a lot of them have stopped working. Whatever the hospital has, basically the disabled people cannot afford them. So there is a gap in the service. So I realized that, well, maybe this is something that I can contribute. So I convinced Mr. Ibrahim to take me to the amputee village and then measure people's stumps. Eventually, we found one willing amputee that are missing fingers and one missing his hand. And I start looking at YouTube, looking at the Enable website to see what can be done. And in late 2015, we made our first wrist-powered hands, the Cyborg Beast. It was very, very well received, and people were surprised to see that I actually did what I promised to do. And but you can see in this group picture, as they celebrate the handing of the prosthesis, one of them on the right-hand side is holding up his thumb because I promised him an arm, and he reminded me that I have to give him one. So, so that's exactly what I did. I found out what options there are online, and I found the unlimited arm and printed a couple out, and brought it back to the country. And the first thing Mr. Ibrahim picked up from the floor was a can of beer. So it looks pretty successful because he was able to use the arm first time without trouble. And this is Mr. Gouger in Freetown, and he's a double amputee. And as you can see, that was the first day in 18 years he could feed himself a piece of bread with his own hand. And I realized that, well, there is some potential here to make more and benefit more amputees. So we did a fact-finding mission in June 2016, basically going to different hospitals and different amputee camps to see what the needs are and what the hospitals can and cannot do. And we published a small feasibility study report in October 2016. The first question we asked all the amputees is, do you want a prosthetic hand? And almost all of them said yes. And then we showed them the 3D printed arms that we have and asked them what they think. And they said, well, that's really good because they're nowhere as heavy as the old ones. And then we, of course, want to see what they would do with these arms. And there's basically something very basic. One lady wanted to chop onions, and another gentleman wanted to move his chair once the sun becomes too hot. So it's very, very basic day-to-day things. And we also showed our hands to some prosthetists in the local hospital, and they said that lifelike functional prosthetics are very rare, so they encourage us to keep going. In our report, we also made some observations about all the PLA hands that we made, and we realized that the PLA ones are pretty not strong enough because one of the first hand that we gave out, the Cyborg Beast, was broken within 3 months. As it turned out, I think the amputee stepped on it at night because there's no electricity, so no one can see it. The other thing is we should avoid or glue down small parts because a lot of the screws, they become loose very, very quickly. And apart from those 2 points, we realized that the Phoenix hand, in the unlimited arm, we should really replace the rubber bands because it only takes 10, 20, 30 contractions for the loom bands to elongate. And once they get longer, they fall off quite quickly. And as you can see in this picture, after 3 months, most of the bands have broken. And the other thing is they want us to exactly match the skin tone. Obviously, milk chocolate is different from dark chocolate, so it's something that we have to consider. And one last thing is for elbow-powered devices, they're not the easiest to use when you don't have tables. When everything is on the floor, it's really hard to bend the elbow and pick things up unless you're actually on the floor. So we've highlighted all these issues that we want to address. But we also know that the guys loved it because the grip is good, and that they love the fact that the thumb can meet the index finger, and that was very encouraging. So we decided that, well, we have a good model, and maybe it's a good starting point. So maybe it's something that we can definitely work on. So the first issue we wanted to solve was the table issue. It didn't cost much, so we actually made each amputee family a table so that they can put things on, so that they don't have to keep grabbing things on the floor. So that's the easiest thing we solved. And then we also realized that if we want to scale this up, when we have more hands, then we need a place to repair them. So in March 2017, we actually built a wooden workshop, put in all the usual machines that you need to make prostheses and to make shoes. And we opened in March this year. And the workshop also serves as a vocational training center for amputees and anyone who wants to learn. Recently, we had someone with polio. He wants to work for us, and we would very welcome them. And because arms are not the only needs, we're branching out, and we're actually making legs, using the traditional methods. But apart from prostheses, the amputees are also making shoes, like shoes for wedding. Everyone has to wear the same shoes, apparently. So there are lots of shoes to be made, lots of shoes to be repaired, just to keep the business going so that it's profitable. But back to the hands. We look at the hands and we look at the rubber bands that needs to be replaced, and realize that when the hand is relaxed, the rubber bands around the knuckle is around 4 cm. But when you contract, those rubber bands get stretched to 50% more than their original length. And we realized that is a problem, and that's why they get loosened up so quickly. So I contacted a 3D designer in Canada and showed him all the different parts that needs to be modified, and told him how to modify them. Basically, we download all the different parts from the Phoenix hand and send it to him over the email, and send him all the illustration of how we want to change. And after, I think, a month or two, the Phoenix was reborn. So basically, it's the Phoenix, instead of using rubber bands, it now uses elastic bands. So as you can see, it goes all the way from the fingertips to the wrist. And you can tie it down at the bars around the tips. And the other thing we changed was the elbow, because the pins kept popping out. So we decided to use binding screws. But binding screws on their own are not very secure as well. So we actually glue them down, like the two parts of the binding screw. We use super glue to glue them. And one more change we made was to find a stronger version of PLA. And fortunately, we found this PLA Plus from China. And in our thermal forming experiment, you really need to boil the PLA Plus because the boiling, I think the melting point is slightly higher than normal PLA. So they don't get as floppy when you heat them up. Right, so after all those changes, we brought our first batch of Phoenix hand to Sierra Leone early this year. Went back to the villages, and guess what? Bambi put on his Phoenix hand, was able to pick up the bread that we bought him, and the first one he fed was me.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget that moment. So it's a very warm, loving environment where people love to smile, and I do feel like I was doing the right thing with the right people. But we also realized that with all these different hands giving out to people for actual use, they're not toys anymore. We need to develop some acceptance criteria. So, and it's particularly true if you have lots of volunteers making hands for you, and you have a mix of different experience level. And so we highlighted a couple of criteria that we want. For example, the thumb has to meet the index fingers, and the forefingers have to close at the same time. They can't close one after another. And in terms of performance, before giving each arm out, we will contract them 100 to 200 times to make sure they will still work and nothing pops out. If it doesn't work, then we don't give them out, or we adjust them. The other thing we noticed was that when we are there to put on the arms, everything is fine. But when we leave the villages, sometimes the double amputees don't have anyone to help them to put on the arms. And it can be very difficult if you don't have any hand to secure all the straps. So we developed this Velcro wristband called a scoop. Basically, you put a sticky side of the Velcro on the back of a spoon or a fork and just stick it onto the wristband. And that was one of the most efficient way to help the elderlies, because they don't need to ask anyone to help them. They can put on the wristband themselves and then start feeding themselves 3 times a day. And this simple device actually got a very, very good review. So 6 months later, from March to August, we went back to the same village to see what happened to the hands and arms. So we surveyed seven arms. We have some that were lost to follow up, but we have at least 7 to look at the time. So half of them were single amputees, and the other half were double amputees. And we asked them different questions. How often do you use them? Whether you're still happy using them? I mean, a lot of them said, I use it every day. But I'm not quite sure, because sometimes I look at the hands, they're not as dirty as I want them to be. Because, they live in a very dusty environment. Everything is covered in dust. If they use it every day, the arms should be very dirty. So I'm not sure if they use it every day. But all of them said they're very happy with it, and it helped them to eat and helped them to drink. One of them actually said his stomach is very sensitive to heat. So when he wants to drink a cup of tea, he will use his prosthetic, because he's not afraid of burning himself anymore. And one or two of them said it actually helped him to use the cell phone. Maybe that's true. We also asked them, after the 6 months in the village, are the devices still functional? And a lot of them are still functional. None of them has broken. But a few of them need maintenance, and one of them needs fitting because it was too wide, too loose. So it was just as well that we had opened up the workshop, because they would actually walk all the way to the workshop to demand repair. So there is a need and there is a demand. So I'm happy that it's there. And all of them still think that the 3D devices are better than the traditional ones, mostly because it's lighter. And because I told them how much it costs the same as a table. They said that it's more useful than a table. And then they would buy it with speed if I can subsidize it. So a good sign. So after that, we went back to Sierra Leone a couple of times and gave out more hands. And we have quite a few happy customers. But that's also a lot of work, because first we have to go and measure them. And then once the hands are ready, we have to fit them once to see how long the straps has to be and how thick the pads has to be. And then eventually we have to go back to them one more time to deliver the arms. So that's our reborn hand. It's available on the Thingiverse. If you want to print it or remix it, please do. So talking about what we want to do next, the reborn hand was a voluntary closing device, right? You make an effort to close it, and sometimes that takes a lot of efforts. Like I try to hold a bottle of water for a long time, and that can get tiring. So I'm thinking of voluntary opening devices. So a lot of the older clamp-like devices, you make an effort to open them. So by default, they're closed, and we want to update that one. And we want to use a hybrid approach because we know that the hospitals can make socket, and their sockets last a long time, more than 10 years. And we want it to be a joint venture so that we can contribute to the local economy as well, so that they can maybe make the socket and we provide the 3D printed hand part. So it can be a partnership, a win-win situation. And for the hand, I approached Mike Lee from Hong Kong Maker Club. I told him what the reborn hand was good for, what it's not good for, and we decided to remake the grip of thumb from Skip Matisse in Rochester. So the first version that he did was basically to replace the zip tie, the cable tie, because I think it depends on your supplier. They can snap very quickly. And so we now have a version that uses thick rubber bands instead. And now Hong Kong Maker Club has made a second version where all the fingers are flexible and you use a cable to pull the thumb. And I show our 3D printed hands to the national director of rehabilitation in Sierra Leone, and he said that he likes our hand, but he thinks the best way to go forward is to use 3D printing to make the bones, and then on top of it, you can slip a silicone glove or brown glove on top to make it grip, to make it more naturalistic. So that's the direction we're going for at the moment. And everything is only possible because of all the volunteers that we had. So in Hong Kong, because of this project, I got a little bit of publicity, and a lot of high school students actually wanted to help. So we have held different makeathon events to make the hands for us. And maybe this is a good time for me to show a couple of videos so you can see how they use the hands. So this is a reborn hand. Okay. So Bambi is just putting his stuff into the drawer. That's the first day they've received the tables. And there's a mango. Okay, so that's the reborn hand. And we also have a video of the new grip of thumb fist hand as well. So that's Mike Lee from Hong Kong. All right, okay. I think you get the idea that the new hand will be very, very, very functional. So we're standing on lots of giant shoulder here, and I think I can now move on to the next part, which is the art project. So in Sierra Leone, there's a huge need for prosthesis because of the civil war, and there is a connection between the civil war and the diamond trade, because if you can control the diamond trade, then you can basically get rich, and the greed fueled many elements of the civil war. So we thought that maybe we can incorporate that into our art design, and because when I was in Sierra Leone, I often got approached by I don't know who they are, miners, that they have rough diamonds for me, costing me $100 each. And I thought, well, maybe next time I go, I can get that. But as it turned out, it's going to cost me at least £5,000 to bring it out legally. So I don't think it's going to happen. But we're thinking of incorporating that into our art hand too. But someone also warned us that don't be too explicit or you'll get into trouble, because it's not something that Sierra Leone wants to remind people of. So I thought of other ways of incorporating the African elements into the hand. So maybe what you are seeing here is a traditional devil, a superpower human being. Well, not human being, superpower. So maybe we can incorporate that into the hand as well. And as you know, Africans love colors, so we have lots of local costumes, local fabrics to draw ideas from. So I think it's going to be very bright, very colorful, whatever it is, with or without diamond. And I just want to thank all the volunteers who've ever helped us, and we have some star fundraisers who ran marathons and did bike ride for us as well. And then this project was only possible because of our sponsor. So Printech donated a mega printer for us so that we can print adult size prosthesis. And Race 3D Hong Kong has actually printed all the Makeathon hands and fists, because they identify with our cause. And honestly, they are some of the best printers I've ever come across. So if you can, please support them as well. And in this journey, I've been inspired by a lot of individuals, regardless of how many number of limbs they have. So I really want to thank them as well for inspiring me to do what we could do. And thank you for listening.
I don't know if you have time, Ed, for any questions. Do we have any questions for Ed?
Yeah, okay.
Any questions?
I have a question, for God's sake. Ed, I'm blown away. If Ken had been here for the beginning, she would have been weeping, as she's prone to do. Just wonderful.
Thank you.
What limits you these days? What is your rate limiting factor?
I got a new job.
Say it again.
I got a new job. So in the past, most of our progress was made when we have the designer next to the 3D printer, next to all the suppliers. When they're all next to each other, you can talk, you can chat. Within a week, you can do things very quickly. But right now, this year we don't have that. So I've kind of outsourced the creative part to Hong Kong Maker Club. But they will send me all the hands, and I'll find a way to ship them to Sierra Leone. And because the workshop is still functional, they can actually fit the hands for us. But we also have one news, because the workshop is so successful, we have been invited to move into a hospital. So I don't know what's going to happen this year, but I think the project will continue definitely because the need is there, and I think we have a network, and they can trust us now. Because in fact, apart from prosthetics, we are providing solar energy to a lot of the amputee camps in country, and the next one we're gonna install is the largest amputee camp in the country. It's gonna impact more than 200 people at the same time. So yeah, we won't stop. Don't worry.
What's your new job?
Running clinical trials. I'm a scientist, so yeah.
Of drugs?
Sorry.
Clinical trials of drugs or prosthetics?
Vaccines. Yes. There might be an opportunity for me to go back regularly. So we'll see.
Have you considered opening up a chapter at the university you just come from, so that you can pass off the knowledge that you have to other students who would like to do what you've done and may have more time to share a good job?
Now that I have more time, because in the past I've been flying between Hong Kong, London, and Sierra Leone, I really don't have time for anything else other than what I need to do. But I think this is a good time for me to pass on those knowledge, and I'm looking forward to finding a bunch of young, enthusiastic volunteers to help me. Definitely.
And if you're trained as a medical researcher,
Yes.
if income were not an issue, which would you like to be doing right now?
I think I would be doing what I did in Sierra Leone. Basically, Monday to Friday, I'm a scientist, and then Saturday, Sunday, I'm with Enable. Yeah. Even in the middle of Ebola, in the Ebola treatment center, there's no television. So what do? In the room? I make hands. And when there's no electricity, what do? You use candles. Yeah.
I noticed on the gripper hand you're using the cable.
Yes.
The picture you took.
Yes.
That Google configuration is with the cable?
Yes, because I noticed that the cables are actually locally available. So the technicians in the hospitals know what to do with them, and they have the harness ready. So I want to tap into what they have so that this can be a joint venture. I don't want to replace them. I want to work with them.
I have another comment. I thought it was. I love seeing your thought process behind going from the unlimited to the unlimited reborn. But I could have to notice, since I've been involved for a while, that the changes you made the changes from the rubber bands back to the cords, and that's the designs were originally made with the cords. So it would be so. I think that shows that you should share your notes about why those work better than the rubber band system, and maybe the people who vouch for the rubber band system should share their notes with you. And in general, if all that information could get spread around the open source community, it would help people make decisions for their future designs.
Absolutely. I think it has to do with how we are disseminating information right now. Because when you have 50 emails a day, you can't read all of them, right?
Yeah.
So I have actually published a feasibility report on Google+. We put it on Facebook, etc. But I think it's going to be better once we have a journal. That's what I heard, right? We're going to have a journal. Yes. So if
Jeff points out that with your permission, we're going to be pushing your presentation, which is a landmark in my book.
Okay.
in the world. So that will help also.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll definitely contribute whatever I can, because some of the amputees have cell phones, and some of the cell phones have WhatsApp. In Sierra Leone, you can only get WhatsApp, Facebook, and Twitter. So we have a line of communication to see how the hands are doing. So
Yeah, let me just say that I think that the follow-up work that you've done, even those 7 patients,
Yeah.
is absolutely critical for us and huge. Those data, by the way, what's clear to me is that those people really, really appreciate what you're doing. I'm not sure I believe the reports, but I totally believe that they appreciate what you're doing, and therefore, so do I. But the fact that you're beginning to collect the data
Yeah.
is huge. And the more you can do that, the more you can urge other people to do it,
Yep.
the better it will. You're a researcher, you know that we're going to get better from here on out.
yes,
To the extent that we start collecting feedback about what fails as well as what succeeds.
yes,
And
yes.
you're a leader in that.
Because every time I go there, it takes me a long, long time. So whatever I bring, I want it to be the best. I don't want it to break within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 10 weeks. So yeah, that's my driving force. I want it to to succeed. I want it to succeed. I want us to succeed, all of us. So thank you for having me.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm letting you go yet. Other questions? What's supposed to happen next? Eric? Yes.
So whenever we're done with Ed, I've got some stuff that I'll talk about. I'm going to show some bioelectrics.
Oh, great.
The room is supposed to, I think this is supposed to end at 8:30, but we have the room till 9. So we'll start. So anybody else have any more questions for Ed? Yeah, Chris.
I wonder how you are following the process as the children are growing, how you are following them. I need experience. Each 6 months, they are changing process. So you are following the process, how you are to guarantee change the process for a new one.
We have 2 kids right now who have received our prosthesis. But my feeling is that the stump is still too short for the unlimited arm to work. So if we're going to have any chance of success, it's going to be a traditional socket with a gripper thumb. So that's what I want to do. I want to pair up with an orphanage who has a disabled center. And but it's something that I'm debating because if you're born with it, they're very natural with it. If you ask the kids, they don't feel like it's a problem until someone pointed out and laughed at him, right? So what I want is a clear signal that they want it first. And until they ask me, I'm not going to push it. So that works with all the adults as well. So if they think they're fine, perfect. It's well, power to you. I mean, I see there's a limb difference. It may not be something that bothers you, right? And maybe it's the fact that you don't have a job that bothers you every day, not the arm. And I've seen people with stump who can hold a bucket of water with no problem. You work with whatever you have. Yeah, so it has to be a collaboration to see what they want, and then I'll try to provide what they want. Yeah. Because in this process, I think one of the most important things is listening to see what they need. And that's why I'm doing so many other things other than hands. Because, yeah. Because I see them as amputees, but sometimes they don't see themselves as amputees. They see themselves as someone who needs electricity, someone who needs a job, someone who needs money to go to school, right? So we help them in other ways too.
I have gotten some inquiries from Nigeria. They have a conflict in their northern territories involving Boko Haram, which also amputations are part of that conflict. And they want to do the kind of thing that you do. Are you potentially available as a consultant to them?
Yeah, ask me anything. Yep.
Okay. One more question.
Yep.
How could the broader Enable network support what you do more effectively? What would you like to see outside of your own little bubble of achievement?
Probably technology, because technology. Because right now, with this hand, we're trying to find a glove that feels like skin but doesn't cost an arm. a lot of them are very, very expensive, and I haven't found anything that is meaningful.
I have good news for you. Prashant Gade, who spent the summer working in our lab, has now very natural-looking silicone rubber gloves manufactured in India.
No way.
The names on the back of the hand, they're really quite striking. He says they're available for $3 each, and I should be getting some soon.
No way. That's wonderful. Yeah. I think an interaction like this is most beneficial because I don't have to go through 10 pages, 20 pages of web page to find out what the like vital informations are. So I think this is what we need. And meetings of all the minds. Yes.
Well, I agree. So anyway, thank you so much for what you're doing and for presenting. Thank you, Maria, who will eventually watch this damn thing, even though she's not here in the room, for making it happen.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk again soon.
Yes, speak soon. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.
Uh,
That's